Welcome to this natal chart synthesis. Date of birth is given as 18th of July 1937. Time of birth 10:40 a.m. somewhere in the United States. And that gives us an ascendant in the sign of Libra. The unique thing about this natal chart, there's several unique things about it. Every natal chart is unique, but what I try to do nowadays with my synthesis is to point out one or two relevant things about the natal chart before the synthesis actually proceeds. And so we have the ascendant in the early stages of Libra, and uniquely the asteroid Juno is 4 degrees, exactly 4 degrees away from the ascendant from the point of view of the 12th house. That is, Juno is in Libra but in the 12th house, okay? And it's 4 degrees from the ascendant. Now, this is a very weak conjunction because it's an asteroid. The orb is very small, like 1.5 degrees or so. But I still consider this to be an important statement in the life story. Why? Because Juno is the thing that you see in the sky at the time when this person is born. Now, what is the significance of the asteroid Juno? It's commitment. Juno is representative of a commitment, the way that you would like to connect to another human being in a committed relationship. Okay? And it's in Libra. That's important. Now, the moon itself is in the 2nd degree of Sagittarius. It's in the 2nd house, in the 2nd degree of Sagittarius. The interesting thing about the moon is that it is conjunct the black moon Lilith. Now, the black moon Lilith is not a functional light. It's a mathematical point, okay? But its significance in the natal chart is a projection of denial, okay? And it's conjunct the moon at the 2nd degree of Sagittarius. The sun itself is well placed because it's been energized. The sun is in the sign of Cancer, but it is tightly conjunct, about 3 degrees or so. It is tightly conjunct Pluto. All right, and that's a very powerful statement because it's in the 10th house. That is, the midheaven has the sign of Cancer on it, and the moon is there. The sun is there, conjunct Pluto. So these are powerful things, and as we narrate the synthesis, the life story, I will draw into your attention these things. But let me give a summary of what the life story really is. This is an individual that is constantly, he's been designed and wired in such a way. You can use the word programmed as long as you realize that the human being is not a computer, your typical computer. But, we can very loosely use the word program. This human being has been programmed to constantly gaze at awe. And you say, what awe? Well, what else? Is the awe of God. All right, and I don't want you to get too deep into this. All right, the reason why I'm mentioning this is to create the right context for the story that we're going to tell. Now, realistically, every human being is gazing at the awe of God, but nobody knows. That's what defines the human perspective. Nobody really knows. Very few people become aware of this, and once they become aware of it, it troubles them. Because as a human being, your entire functional mind is trying to make meaning of existence. Because that is how you define yourself. You define yourself by making meaning of yourself. And then the meaning you make of yourself is the meaning that you extend into the reality that you're experiencing. So we are meaning-making machines in some sense, right? Now, as a result of this, it's almost like there is a type of shielding. It's not quite, but I'm going to use these terms because of the story that I need to tell. There is a kind of shielding that shields the human being from the constant awe that it experiences from gazing at the Most High. The reason for that is so that the human being can experience a modicum of self-awareness. Because self-awareness means that you have to feel a bit disconnected. You have to feel isolated in some sense, so that you can possess your own self-consciousness and you can feel like you are your self-consciousness. It's a very important thing because otherwise the human being cannot experience free will. Now, if you've been listening to my podcast, there's nothing like free will, but the human being cannot experience that because if it does, then it no longer has the conviction of agency. And that's an important thing in the human theater of experience. This feeling of agency. Now, when God, through his programming and his design of a human being, reduces or dials down the amount of shielding that the human being has in order to feel a sense of agency, then the human being begins to experience the inflow of this gaze at awe, the awe of God. Now, God is not something that can be defined. It's unknown and unknowable. So when a human being's shielding is reduced, then the human being begins to experience severe problems mentally. Why? Because you are gazing on something that you can never explain, gazing on something that you can never understand, really. So what do you do about it? It's not something, it becomes a part of your consciousness. And so there's an aspect of you that you cannot understand, you cannot explain, etc. Because that's what it means. Now, in this life story, the shielding has been reduced. And it has been reduced to a point such that another aspect of this person's psyche has been engineered with a compulsion to describe the gaze. Now, I've just told you that the gaze is impossible to define. It's impossible to delineate. And you would say, but what type of arrangement is this? Why compel a human being to try to describe something that is indescribable? Well, that's the life story we're going to tell. Because it is an extremely powerful story. All right? Now, this person is a known person. They have passed away, sadly, but they lived a life that is known. All right? And that is the statement of the sun in the 10th house. But we're going to talk about what these things mean. All right? How they connect into a oneness. But the overall pattern of the life is an individual that is compelled to gaze into something that they cannot define, and yet they are compelled to define it. And the definition has to be a narration. They have to open their mouth and speak, or they have to take up their pen and write. And every time they do that, the real motivation behind it, even though they do not know what this is, this person would have felt that their entire life, but they don't know what it is. They have no idea they're gazing on something. They don't know anything. All they know is that there is a pit. Something that looks like a bottomless pit. An ever-expanding void in their awareness. And every time they try to probe it, consciously or unconsciously, it returns a null value. There's nothing there. There's nothing you can understand. Nothing you can comprehend. Do you have any idea what this does to the human psyche? It's the nature of evaporation. Because it is contrary to the emergence of a physical human being. Because when a human being is born, you are thrust into a world of definition, a world of delineation, and everything that the entire way you are designed as a human being is to facilitate your delineation, definition of the world, of yourself. All right? So it is that gaze and that the lowering of the shielding is almost contradictory to the emergence of the physical human being, but it's not. And this was done for a reason, a purpose. Why? Because God is the source of the most beautiful thing that you cannot even imagine. That's how it works. The greatest awe, the greatest source of beauty that you can't even imagine it, not to talk of, because your imagination is physical. Whatever you think of it, all your imaginations are connected to various variations of your experiences, your material experiences, your physical experiences. You cannot imagine anything outside of your collective experiences as humanity. All right? So even our imagination as humans, which we think is limitless, is not really. It's very confined and bounded. But you can see that we feel our imagination as if it's a limitless thing because it inspires us. And from there, we're able to retrieve as many variations to our storytelling as we can imagine. Okay, it's a quintessential human trait. All right. So that's the high level narrative of the synthesis of the life story. Somebody who is enabled to be able to gaze at something that is indefinable, undefinable, or irrepresentable, and yet their life story is, they are compelled and mandated to narrate what they are experiencing or what they are gazing upon. And within this scenario, this individual does not know that they are gazing on something. They don't know what I've just explained to you right now. All right? They don't know. But they feel it as part of themselves, and they feel it as some type of void, some type of openness that doesn't end. Nothing can fill it up. It's a hunger of some kind that they don't even know that they're hungry, because it's not the normal traditional way of sensing hunger. They just feel it as an appetite for something beyond the physical, even beyond the spiritual, and they don't know what it is. And that creates a hunger, a very unique type of hunger, because whenever that type of thing appears in a person's life, that life is not going to be easy. Yeah, because if you're hungry physically, you can eat food and satiate your hunger. If you're thirsty, you can drink water. Well, what do you feed this? There's almost nothing. I sometimes marvel at some people when they say, oh, I was called by God. My dear, if you're called by God, your life is not going to be easy. This is a person that has been called by God for one specific reason. And it's not the type of calling that people think, because everybody thinks that when you are called by God, that means you must be a spiritual person, or you must be a guru, or you must be a religious person. No, not necessarily. Some people find those types of manifestations. They find those type of pathways, but not necessarily. And we're going to tell that story right here. Okay? Now, the ascendant itself is in Libra, and what that means is that when this person was born, their posture of the emergence into this physical world, their posture was that Libra. And what is Libra? Libra is a sense of balance, but it's more than that. I like to describe it as the nature of equidistribution. All right? It's a type of balance in some sense, but it's not just balancing two things. It means that even if you have 1,000 things, you still have to find a way to balance them. So even if you have 1 trillion things, you still have to find a way to balance them. And so when Libra rises on your ascendant, you are compelled to look for that type of balance. And so you will always measure, or you will always calibrate your sense of self by how much sense things make to you. That sense making is the balance we're talking about. All right? So imagine a person who's born with this gaze into awe, and compelled to write about it, or to narrate it, or to describe it. And meanwhile, they don't know that that's what, because, listen, if you're called upon to write about a beautiful story, or a beautiful woman, or a beautiful event, or whatever, well, the event itself, or the thing that is being observed, is what gives you the material for narration. Here, the thing that is being observed is really unobservable. So what is the material? Well, it simply means that the person will look for a definition of that which is being observed. They will look for it in everything, as everything, because they don't know what it is. And so they will explore. There will be a variation in the themes. All right? Now, what God does is to engineer the person's consciousness in such a way that it focuses on certain areas which he wants to highlight with the life story of this person. Okay? And we're going to be coming to that. So Libra represents this, especially when it rises on the ascendant. It's a potential, because that's what the ascendant is. It's a potential for the launch of the life story. And that potential is now crouched in Libra, meaning that there is a compulsion to try to balance the books. All right? And once you put that within the context of gazing at something that really cannot be gazed upon, and then trying to write about it, the individual is always trying to reconcile this thing they're gazing upon without even knowing they're gazing upon it. They're always trying to reconcile it to themselves. Because that which you're gazing upon is not you doing the gazing. Yes. And so you are internalizing it. That's what it means. And if that thing is undefinable, unbounded, you can't really say anything about it, then that means that you experience that as a statement of yourself. And this is never easy. People develop rationality normally. It's a natural thing people do. They think about the world in ways that allow them to be effective in the world. It's just part of what being human is. Well, the aspect of that, of a human being that does that, is what we astrologically call the sign of Virgo. Because Virgo is the crossover between the human as it experiences itself internally, and then as it prepares to encounter the reality systems of others. Now, agency means that we experience ourselves as singular beings, or internal beings. We experience a type of isolation. All right. Virgo is what prepares us to begin to connect to other people's isolation. So you can imagine human beings as individual isolated pockets of experience. It's not exactly accurate, but you can imagine it that way. And so we are compelled to communicate, to reach out, to extend ourselves into the reality systems of others. You can imagine every human being as carrying their own individual, independent universe. It's not exactly accurate, but you can imagine it that way. Okay? Virgo is what prepares us to be able to connect these realities together. And that connection begins to happen in the sign of Libra. So, in Libra, you are forced to seek equidistribution. It appears as a type of beauty to you. And like I said, equidistribution, you can balance two things together, depending on the criteria or the physical condition that you're looking to balance. But even if you have 1,000 things or 1,000,000,000,000 things, you will still seek that type of a kind of balance that makes sure that everything seems to get its due in some sense. And this person, because Libra is rising on the ascendant, they are balancing the relationships. Everybody they have ever met fits into something, some type of profile in their reality. Now, this is where it gets interesting. That profiling, the profile of balance or equidistribution, there's Juno there. And the Juno is in the 12th house, meaning it's not a tangible thing. It's just another expression of that hunger. It's like an island in the hunger. So there is an interest in a commitment to this equidistributional balancing. All right? Because the individual is retrieving something from it, a sense of beauty. That sense of beauty is how they're trying to approach the thing that they cannot define. So every attempt to define something, to narrate it, to describe it, is really an attempt to define and describe the self. This is a very, very crucial point in this synthesis. Because like I said in some of my podcasts, the idea of an external reality whereby you are somehow decoupled from, if you're observing that reality, you have internalized it. It has become a part of you. Because as human beings, the only way that we can experience reality is to map ourselves into it. In other words, the concept space or the conceptual space that is existence itself, the only way we can know about it is by internalizing it, by becoming it. Just pick up a book, read the book. Well, the story is now in your head. Guess what? You're no longer the same person. Go make a breakfast for someone you love, and they show you the appreciation with a hug or a kiss. Well, you're no longer the same person. That's the nature of our self-consciousness. And this is very important in this life story. Because the individual is going to try to express himself in every possible way. But make no mistake about it. What they're really trying to express is not the things really outside of them. They're only trying to express themselves. And every expression carries the aspect of them that is undefinable. This expansive void. It's like a nothingness that just... Meanwhile, it's not a nothingness. I call it awe. It's almost like a state of... How do you call it now? Catatonia? A state of... It's a trance-like condition. Because you're not actively trying to retrieve anything, because there's really nothing there to retrieve. It's like some type of mystical trance, but it's not. Meaning that there's really nothing you can say about everything you can say about it, no matter how much it qualifies what you're trying to express. It's not really it. Because that in itself is undefinable. And so the aim of this arrangement is to create an imaginative capacity that is not just limitless in the sense of the containment of our physical experiences. No, it is truly limitless. And when this happens to a human being, that human being has mental problems. That's what it is. There's just no way to ever define it, because the human being is not, our consciousness is something that we feel as if it is contained. It's where we get all our definitions from. Once the individual feels some type of lack of containment, then the individual can't really separate things. They can't really define things independent. Everything blurs into everything. How do you maintain a sense of self? How do you function? And that's the weight that this person is carrying in their consciousness, and it will color everything. Now, let us talk about the inclination for this, because God has done this for a reason. Because he must now give the person the ability to keep making progress, even though the person can't win. It's the journey that matters. And God needs that journey for reasons that we will now begin to look at. The rulership of Libra is Venus. But Venus also rules Taurus. Now, the relationship between Taurus and Libra is that the rulership of Libra is Venus, right? And Venus also rules Taurus. But Venus, as a ruler of Taurus, is a very material, pleasure-seeking type of functional light. It really is concerned with what you really, really like, what gives you pleasure. And as a result of that, Venus associated with Taurus acts like a vector, so that when you get out of your house, for instance, you know which direction to go because of that Venus, because you are motivated towards that pleasure. Okay? But first, you must know what gives you pleasure. And you must know it not as an intellectual pursuit, it's an instinct. All right? That Venus is in Gemini, meaning that Gemini must produce that Venus. Gemini is quite different from Taurus from Venus, in the sense that it's our intellectual capacity and our intellectual mind. It's the way we begin to narrate in our heads. And Gemini comes alive from the evolution of Taurus. And Gemini is always represented by a question. And the thing that the human mind generates as an intellect is a self-questioning ability. Because when the child, the infant child, when it generates the ability to think, its first thoughts are always regarding what it is. It doesn't know what it is. All right? And the thought comes into existence when it begins to try to answer the question regarding what it is, what's really going on, what's happening, what is it experiencing. Okay? And this starts from very humble beginnings. Why? Because it doesn't know it. The child doesn't know anything. And those initial questionings of the infant child, they lead to a lot of anxiety, because the mind, even though it's not very capable yet, it can perceive one thing very clearly. First, it feels like nothing, and it's vulnerable. It doesn't know anything, doesn't understand anything, so it is not surrounded by meaning making and deciphering. No, it's surrounded by questions that just keep going on, and it doesn't even know what a question is. And so it is surrounded by tremendous anxiety. And that's Gemini. And the way that this anxiety is removed is when that anxiety reaches the sign of Cancer. Mother is the agent that stabilizes the child's reality by reinforcing a signal of self-acceptance that calms the child down. The child begins to experience love, nurturing, and it calms all the anxiety. All right? But that Gemini is what is producing that Venus. So that Venus carries a question, and the question revolves around the nature of pleasure, because that's what Venus is. But it also revolves around the nature of the interactivity with others, because that's what Libra is. The ability to relate with other realities, other personalities, other universes in a social way, so to speak. Meaning that Venus is concerned about the stories that people tell themselves about themselves. So that Venus compels this individual to narrate about themselves. But the Venus is in the 9th house, and that 9th house, being a house, the natural house of Sagittarius, is a very lofty thing, because Sagittarius sits opposite Gemini. So in Gemini, you develop the basic questions that deliver the basic concepts. In Sagittarius, you use those concepts and you connect them together in long range order, patterns that reveal even greater meaning and philosophies. And that gives a quality to that Venus in Gemini, giving it a preference for narrating the overall structure of things. Okay? And what do you think the inclination is going to be when the mind has given itself pleasure in the ability to narrate the overall patterns of things? Well, the thing this person has been struggling with since they were born, and they didn't even know that it was a struggle. They just knew that they had this mental challenge. It's not like they're not smart or they're not sharp. They are. But there's the growing void of nothingness. And I'll explain how that nothingness sits. Okay? Because it is connected to that mind. Why? Because the rulership of Gemini is Mercury. And where's Mercury? It's sitting in the 10th house in Leo, which means that it is carrying a sense of significance. But because Gemini is a question, then it carries significant questioning. And where do you think this significant question is going to be directed at? It's always directed at the self first. Because it's the awareness of yourself, is what you come to find out about yourself. That's what it means to find out about your reality. Because after all, you are the one mapping into that reality. The concept space that is the nucleus of reality, the reality of God, is unknown and unknowable in that sense. But we map into it by telling stories about this reality. If we tell the right stories, then you have predictability. You have meaning. All right? But we are mapping ourselves into the great unknown. And when we successfully map, we call that knowledge. Okay? So this is a knowledge seeker. But the knowledge being sought really is a knowledge of self. That Mercury is in Leo. It's in the 10th house, meaning it represents part of the ambition, part of the aspiration, just like the Sun conjunct Pluto that is sitting in the sign of Cancer. And so we have a pathway starting with the Sun in the 10th house. It starts with the Sun, the nature of that significance that controls Leo. But that Sun is conjunct Pluto, and anything that conjuncts Pluto, anything in Scorpio, is supercharged with emotional intensity. And the intensity itself is the nature of sex. Because that nature of sex, that nature of the closest possible contact two realities can make, right? It's at the root of the way this conceptual space, the way that it is blending into a physical existence, the way that it translates into a physical existence. That root propulsion system is the nature of what we call sex. After all, human beings are born through what? Sex. Most multicellular organisms are born through what? Sex. And so when it shows up in the human being, it carries this sexual urge, but it carries it as a fear of some kind. That fear is what makes the human seek power, influence. So when the Sun is sitting conjunct Pluto like that in the sign of Cancer, it's in the 10th house, and that is a very powerful drive for power, for significance, for recognition and influence. It's very powerful, it's very potent, because the individual will seek it. They don't have a choice in the matter. That's why the Sun is conjunct Pluto. But the conjunction is in the sign of Cancer, which means that it is in response to all the questions raised in Gemini. That's how it sits. We know this because there's Chiron in Gemini. Chiron in Gemini obviously tells us that whatever the answers this person is looking for, they're not finding it. That's what Chiron represents. It's a pain of some kind. And that means that you have to go further. All right? And it is designed to lead the person towards that Sun conjunct Pluto, because out of that dynamic of the Sun conjunct Pluto, that Mercury in Leo will emerge, the narrator. Because like I told you, the life story is geared towards in such a way that the individual is staring at something they cannot really define, and yet they are compelled to narrate. It's almost as if, you are compelled to describe what you are looking at, but what you're looking at has no definition. So anything you really say about it is not true. But you can keep looking for ways to define it. It's like it's a compulsion. And the presence of Juno in the 12th house in that Libra, right, compels the person really powerfully. Because that Juno, I mean, who's committed to what? You want to be committed to beautiful things. And so it resonates with the Venus in Gemini. It forces the person into chasing that Venus in Gemini, because that Venus is the ruler of this natal chart. And in Libra, Venus represents the beauty of social interaction, the pleasure of it. Getting to know people, creating impressions, because in Libra, everybody creates their first impressions. They try to create the best impressions, but that impression now is in the form of a question. And it's not just questioning the details as you would normally get in Gemini. It's questioning the overall picture. So not only do you have an inquisitive person, you have a person that is looking for the way things connect to each other in a kind of full structure, a global structure. It forces people to want to reveal things. They want to reveal the way that things work, or the way that people's realities are connected together. Because it's not really about people's realities. Like I've said, that's why I started the synthesis the way that I did. They're trying to reveal themselves, even though they don't know that that's what they're trying to do. It's a very important distinction. Because if they knew, then everything changes. Okay? So all their self-expressions, right? Because Mercury is just the need, it's the way that the mind works. It's not the real expression of the mind. It's just the way that the mind is designed to work. The way that you are designed to think. It's like a cognitive style, so to speak. And that Mercury comes out of that union, that conjunction between the Sun and Pluto. And the Mercury is in Leo, meaning it's the significant part of the storytelling, because Leo is the active storyteller in your psyche. It emerges from the sign of Cancer. And like I've said, the sign of Cancer takes away the anxieties of the questioning process. And it births that self-acceptance as Leo, a powerful ego that is ready to actually do the storytelling, right? So let's begin to connect these things. Libra, Venus, and the 7th house cusp, they form a synthesis. And so we've looked at Libra, we've looked at Venus. Let's also look at the 7th house cusp, because on the 7th house cusp, we find Aries in there. And Aries is ruled by Mars. And that relationship means that Aries, Mars, and the 1st house cusp, the ascendant, which has Libra on it, they form a synthesis. Okay? And what is that synthesis? It is a synthesis of motive. The thing that clicks in your head and makes you want to do something. That's the Martian impetus. It's an impulse. It's an energy system. It's not concerned with the meaning of what is being done. It's concerned with the will to get something done. Just get up and go without really thinking too much about it. Because it's a very one-dimensional, spontaneous process. Okay? The rulership of that Aries, which is Mars, it's in Scorpio, which means that it has now become obsessive compulsive. And what is the obsession around? It's around sex. Mars in Scorpio is a statement about the obsession regarding sex, power. And that Mars is in the 2nd house, money, material things, because it's the natural house of that Venus. So as long as that Venus is asking a lot of questions, it's going to pull that Mars. And whenever Mars and Venus get together like that, that's the physical characteristics of what? Sex. Lovemaking. Because it's how you begin the journey of defining yourself. Now, we know what has happened to that journey. I've spent 30-something minutes describing what has happened to that journey, because the individual experiences this void, this absence as part of themselves. And it's not something that just sits there stationary. It's growing. And as it grows, it's a kind of frightening state. It's as if the individual feels themselves disappearing. Well, we know that is what is happening. Why? Because there's Saturn in Aries. And that means that there's Saturn in that Mars. And when you understand the compulsion behind Mars in Scorpio, that Saturn is not sitting well at all. And so the Mars is not sitting well at all, because Mars in Scorpio is a compulsiveness, and Saturn comes to interrupt this compulsiveness. The design builds a tremendous amount of potential energy, and the individual experiences the potential as what, for lack of a better term, you can describe it as mania. Extreme states of being in that Martian function. Sometimes very powerful, unstoppable. Mars is in Scorpio. A tiger in between the sheets. And some other times it all disappears. It fades away as if it doesn't exist. That is the other side of the personality. That is the statement in that ascendant, where it looks as if the entire power, the entire capacity, it just vanishes, because the person is clued into that which cannot be defined. That process itself is like a negation of everything. And that is what that Saturn in Aries is symbolizing. Now, that brings us to the real matter here, because I've been talking about this gazing at all, gazing at nothing, or gazing, but what does it really mean astrologically? I'll tell you how it is being implemented, because we have come to that juncture. You see, Saturn is not just in Aries, it's in the 6th house. All right? Now, that 6th house is the natural house of Virgo. And Virgo is what translates the active storytelling and the search for significance of Leo. It is what translates it into action. It's a plan. Because listen, you might realize that you are significant based on the way that your creativity fuels your sense of self. You can design things and you see such beauty in it. It gives you some type of joy. You can write things, you see such beauty in it, such greatness in it. It gives you a sense of joy because you're experiencing the joy of creation. Yeah? But it's an internalized process. You know about it. Nobody else does. And so Virgo is the compulsion to share that which you have created with others. Because Leo's active storytelling, the search for self-significance, well, Leo already knows that it's significant. But what does it mean? So in order for Leo to connect with meaning, it must demonstrate its significance. And as a result of that, Leo must go on a journey. The journey is to Aquarius, because that's what sits opposite Leo. Both are statements of significance. The significance of the ego, the active storyteller. And the ego's joy is compounded when it is what? Recognized for its significance. That's really what it is. Okay? Now, but it all starts with Virgo. Because without Virgo, Leo tries to go into Libra. And when Leo tries to do that, the Libran function or the Libran distributed light, it rebuffs Leo. Because Libra is where you equidistribute, where you balance, where you share. Leo is not big on sharing because it's the sun, is an energy source. It's a focus. So when that focus comes into Libra or tries to come into Libra, then it's a mismatch. And so what happens is that such people don't get along well with others. It's not because there's something inherently wrong about them. They have not had the proper interpretation of their significance into Virgoan skills. Things that Virgo is concerned with. And Virgo is the rationality of your mind. It is the way that you must structure the pathway from Leo to Capricorn, where your significance is displayed for all to see before it now settles in Aquarius. It doesn't work if there's no Virgo. So Virgo is the translator of that language that Leo is speaking. Because without that translation, the journey really can't start. We see Pisces on the cusp of the 6th house, which is a statement regarding that Virgo. It's almost like it's not there. It is exactly similar to the void that this individual feels. The awe they're gazing on without being able to describe what it is that they're gazing on, because it has no definition. And yet they must attempt. They must be driven to define it. Okay, because it's not just about defining what they see, it is about defining themselves. That statement is reinforced by Virgo's itself sitting on the cusp of the 12th house. That brings that Virgo into the world of Pisces. And Pisces is not a thing. Pisces is where all the stories converge and they dissolve into nothingness. It's not really nothingness, it's self-transcendence. That means that at that point, the individual has told all the stories that are possible. The only story left is ascending to God, or some type of paradisic ascent. Okay? The individual is no longer concerned about all the material things of reality. They've told all those stories. They now want something more. Well, the statement is further compounded by the fact that Neptune is in Virgo in the 12th house. Do you have any idea what this does to the mind? Because that Virgo is the engine that translates the significance. The significance is a statement that is made about the Sun conjunct Pluto. It cannot be ignored. And we know this because we see the Mercury being issued from that process. The Mercury itself is in Leo. So all of this leonine significance, all of this need for recognition, all of this compulsive, obsessive need for recognition, by engaging into the reality of others in a way that helps you blend in almost harmoniously or ceremoniously, that allows you to reach your aspirations, well, all of that can't really get going if Virgo is not there, and Virgo has been dissolved. This is what creates the awe. Because what it's telling you really is that when this person was born, the highest planet in the sky, in some sense, in terms of rising above the horizon, it wasn't that Juno, it was Neptune. Okay? Yeah, it's during the daytime, the sun is in the close to the midheaven in the 10th house and all that. But the planet with the greatest impact, because that sun is a statement of Leo. How do you get? Leo doesn't get anywhere without Virgo. It doesn't, because Virgo is like the mechanical translation of that self-significance. It's the thing, it's literally like stepping outside the door on a journey somewhere. But if you can't step outside the door, then where are you going? And that Virgo has been dissolved. It's been connected to awe. So that you can imagine Virgo as some type of rational pathway, like a tree diagram. You know what a tree diagram, a decision-making process. Because in Virgo, you are trying to answer the question, what's in it for me? And simply what that means is that, what do I need to exchange with another person in order to be able to go into a relationship with them that allows me to get what I want? It's the way we think about ourselves on an everyday level to be effective. You want to go to the store, you want to, take your car to the car wash, you want to pick up the kids. It's the basic planning, but it's not about the planning itself. It's about the structure of thinking. And that structure of thinking is very important to this person because they are compelled to narrate. Now, that awe they are gazing upon, that is what feels like a dissolution. And it is primarily engineered in their ability to plan, their ability to decipher, to be rational, that's where the dissolution is really being experienced. So you can have all the significance, but you must be able to translate it into a plan, into a way to achieve. All right? Otherwise, all the energy behind the storytelling behind it, then what's it for? And so this is where the Achilles heel of the person really lies. Why? Because that greatness, the need for it, the need for significance, it needs interpretation. And it's a deliberate design. Why? Because that person will attempt many types of interpretations. That's why it's there. It's to create that frustration, to create that dissolution, so that the person can attempt and keep attempting, because they're not really trying to define anything. They're trying to define themselves. And if you want to create a sort of never-ending process for the expansion of imagination, it needs to be experienced as an infinite container, an infinite void that needs to be filled. And as long as the person can keep up the desire to fill up that void because they feel like they're making progress, then the arrangement is stable in some sense. But if not, then there's serious problems with mental health, because the individual just feels that there's no point, really. What is the point? Okay. And the feedback for that process, right, is that what that Libra is talking about. They must feel like there is some type of equidistributional balance. Not just in themselves, not just in nature, not just in themselves, in everything. And they must come to internalize this process. Why? Because the Saturn in the 6th house is a statement about what that Neptune is doing. It's telling us of the struggles of this person. Because once Saturn is in Aries, the potential of Aries, which is to launch or to relaunch motivation, right? That potential is dampened. Because Aries must, and the Mars that rules it, it must be spontaneous. That's the nature of itself. That's the nature of the functional light and the distributed light of Mars and Aries respectively. And that is how we launch ourselves into this world. Without it, the energy to survive the birthing process simply won't be there. And we can see that this person carries a tremendous amount of that energy. Why? Because the Mars is in Scorpio. This is a person that is fully really concerned with survival. Because the Mars is in Scorpio. Okay? They're concerned with being somebody. Because the Sun is conjunct Pluto. Pluto rules that Scorpio. So the Sun and the Mars, they have been tied into that scorpionic influence as a way to make sure that this desire cannot be ignored. It creates the need to go on, the need to survive. Because the thing that is trying to suck that survival out is the void. And you must balance it out carefully. Otherwise, the individual might succumb to the hopelessness or the nothingness of it all. Now, how is this balanced out? Well, the contrast for Saturn, the balancing, is the compensator of Jupiter, Sagittarius. All right? And Jupiter, Sagittarius, and that 9th house, they're in a synthesis. That 9th house is where that Venus in Gemini is. And it is conjunct the South Node. It is the pleasure that comes from being able to narrate and connect pieces of the puzzle together into a larger philosophy of a structure. The ability to see that structure is the ability to have faith. That's really what it is. Where's the Jupiter located? The Jupiter is located in Capricorn. Now, this is very, very hard. Because the Jupiter is located not just in Capricorn, it's also in the 4th house. And it is conjunct the asteroid Pallas. I'll tell you what that means. Jupiter is how we build that faith against the long-term procession of a Capricornian journey or a Saturnian journey. Without it, we just give up. It's too hard. There's no point, really. We can't make any progress. The compensator of Jupiter tells us that even though things are hard, we are progressing towards a destination that will ultimately be fruitful. And we keep our eyes on that to maintain that journey. That's why Sagittarius comes before Capricorn. Well, where's Sagittarius? Sagittarius is on the cusp of the 3rd house. Now, the Sagittarian experience starts from the 2nd house because Scorpio is on the cusp of the 2nd house, and that Scorpio contains Mars. That Mars in Scorpio is a generator of emotional intensity. But it can't really feel all of its intensity because Saturn is in Aries, dampening that Mars. Now, so the Mars, you can imagine that it is half on and half switched off. And the person feels this is a physical process, a physical, endocrine, biochemical process, because Scorpio deals with your sexual hormones. And when you have Mars in Scorpio, you have a very strong libido. But with this arrangement of Saturn in Aries and Mars in Scorpio, that libido fluctuates off and on. And it can disappear at any moment. That's the horror of it. So that the individual retains the desire, but they can't do anything about it. There's just nobody at home at that point. That's why I call it mania. Because it leads to euphoria and depression. And they just keep switching between the two. Now, all of this makes it very difficult on the psyche. So that I'm not surprised that this individual had, addictive problems with addiction, alcohol and substance. That's their attempt to keep this balance, to try to maintain, because they cannot really, define what is happening to them. These are the type of people that synthesis really is designed to help. Because you can see that what the mind is really struggling with is struggling with meaning. It doesn't know why all of this. Why is it like this? You see that switch between what I call euphoria, mania and depression, this euphoria and depression, right? They become the two personality states of this person, symbolized by that Libra that is rising. And so I'm not surprised that this person had two identities. I mean, the person knew that they were both identities. They created the alternate identity to become to carry the impulse of the part of themselves that retains the desire, but it's been switched off. There's nothing there. So they flit between these two personalities. They're both. Okay? One is a pseudo personality, but so what? The way that you define yourself is also it's an identification process. You can call yourself whatever you want. Okay? As long as you remember that you are both or many of these things you're calling yourself, then people don't think you're crazy. People think you're crazy when you identify with one character which you have created and you don't remember that there's another character until you switch into that character and then topsy-turvy. So this person was aware of their mental condition or their mental state. That's how aware they are. And that tells us that the mind had developed to a point where it was aware, but it could not connect to the real purpose of why this arrangement existed. Now, this person was a journalist and a writer, and you can see expression of that narrating ability, the compulsion to narrate, but where they would have struggled with was meaning. Why am I narrating this? So you can find somebody who has a great enthusiasm in the start of a project or the start of a narration, but they run out of steam. Because after a while, they just lose the meaning of it all. Remember, this meaning is not outside of themselves. What they're really struggling with is meaning about themselves. What is the nature of this void? And I'm sure that this person doesn't realize that the void is there, because the void is experienced as awe. So there's an obsessive compulsiveness about trying to define this thing that is indefinable. And so they will seek different types of narrative projects or narrative engagements in trying to capture something that really cannot be captured. Okay? Now, this switching on and off of the intensity of this Mars in Scorpio, that is what generates that moon in Sagittarius. It's also what generates the black moon Lilith that is conjunct that moon in Sagittarius. And both of these conjunctions are in the second house. Because this Mars that is switching off and on in its intensity is a statement about the body. So that at some point, this would have been, part of the life experience of this person. The libido is very strong. The desire to achieve is very strong. The desire for power is very strong. Remember, that Scorpio is connected to that Pluto that is in the 10th house conjunct the Sun. At some point it surges, and then for some unknown reason that is hard to really pin down because it appears mystical, as if it comes from nowhere, the entire lights just go off. All right? And if you want to imagine what this is like, it's like a powerful man who sits at the top of a very large global corporation, who has access to all the paraphernalias of wealth and power and all that. And then after some time, he forgets who he is completely. And he reimagines himself as a destitute, a poor man, a destitute, someone who has no significance and no power at all. And now somewhere within him, he realizes that he's both, but he has no control over the switching. Do you realize how frustrating that can be? Because it's the feeling of being able to experience power and powerlessness simultaneously. And this will show up in the type of realities he's connected to, the type of friends, the type of relationships. So you have somebody who has a very tight nucleus of friends who literally worship the person like a cult figure. And then maybe that makes up like 20%. And then the remaining 80% of people detest the person. Well, detest is a strong word, but they just consider the person too eccentric or too whatever. And they just push the person away. Okay? Now, what would typify that close nucleus of friends or relationships is that they understand. And the only way you understand anything is if you can identify with it. Okay? Because the person is struggling with a mental health challenge. It's not your typical mental health challenge, because it has an obsessive compulsiveness to it, meaning it has a very powerful expression to it. So that the person is forced into certain types of behaviors, almost as if they have no control over them. And yet, that's not the motive. Now, when this person can narrate in a way that satisfies that longing they have, when they can connect the dots together, when they can bring out something that satisfies this sense of unknown longing they have, then their world brightens. Why? Because of the feedback they get, because that feedback is the nature of significance. So when they put out a piece and that piece does very well, it changes them, it brightens, it pulls them out. But if they have a sustained period of that negative feedback, it's very, very damaging. Very, very, very damaging. And the individual will fight against this by trying to use that Mercury that is in Leo, trying to derive that sense of significance from different types of publishing or literary projects. And this person took on a lot of projects. Now, that moon that is in Sagittarius, conjunct the black moon Lilith, Sagittarius also contains the North Node. And all those placements in Sagittarius, they are statements of Jupiter. The Jupiter is in Capricorn. And Jupiter in Capricorn means that even the compensatory side of this nature, it needs to be deserved. It needs to be earned. And so within the individual sits a judgment. Even in the compensator. It's a very difficult placement. But there's a reason why it has. Because like I said, look, these designs are not accidental. Alright? And within every natal chart, God balances out the goodness and how it can shine or how it can come out. Okay? But if circumstances are so detrimental in some sense, whereby that plan cannot be fulfilled, and something happens to the individual, let's say like the individual dies, then the individual will come back again. And when they come back, they will carry variations to the same theme. That's how it works. Okay? Now, the Jupiter here is in the 4th house because it is compensating in the house of that moon. So that is the relationship between the Jupiter and the moon. But because it's in Capricorn, it must feel like it has been deserved. And the Saturnian influence that is creating that need for deservation or that need to deserve something, it's in Aries. All right, it's in the 6th house. It's in Aries. So every time this person, remember that 6th house is the natural house of Virgo. So we're talking about the Virgo that sits on the 12th house cusp with the Neptune in it, and that becomes the judgment. So that this person feels, in some sense, like they are being judged by God, even though they may not be a religious person or even a spiritual person, but they feel it so deep inside them they cannot really speak about it. Not just by God, because God is the final authority, but every other authority figure, because the authority mold, in a sense, within a child's life is really patterned against the influence of the father. And this person's influence, or this person's awareness of the father that began to pattern the authority figures, right, was calibrated by the relationship between that father and the mother. That's why the Jupiter itself is compensating in the 4th house through the mother, but it is being produced by the father. That will now form this person's perspective towards all authority figures. All. And if you read the biography of this person or an article about this, but this person was a non-conformist. They did not agree with authority. And the only reason why people do that is because their sense of self-significance makes them feel like their own authority. This person has the sun conjunct Pluto in the 10th house. It's not a person that you suppress or you oppress. Fighting for themselves and standing up for themselves is their second nature, especially when they have Mars in the sign of Scorpio. Now, the Mars itself is in the 2nd house, meaning that it's not just the inclination towards a libido that is half on very strongly and then half off very strongly too. It also affects their finances. So at sometimes, based on some things, they feel like they have done very well, comfortably financially. And at other times, they feel like it's all for nothing. And this person may not communicate any of these things, but they feel it. That's the entire point. And it will show up in their productivity, their writings, their narrations. Because remember, they are trying to describe a thing that cannot be described, really. And so when you are faced with that type of condition, then what you're really trying to describe is yourself. You're trying to nail yourself down into this is what I am, or this is who I am. And it's a lifelong thing because obviously it cannot really be defined. That gap or that vacuum has been created deliberately so that this person can populate it with perspectives. The life story of this person, God wants to see what they're going to say. That's it. God wants to be able to, it's just, okay, the freedom to tell whatever stories, but you're not going to have any fixed frame of reference for your storytelling. And which simply means that I want you to dig deep into yourself, and whatever you find there, bring it out. Reminds me of a passage in the Torah where it says that in Genesis, the early part of Genesis, I think Genesis 1 or 2, where God brought every creature that he had made to Adam so that Adam can name them. Well, simply what was going on is that because every creature, none of it had any form really, because whatever Adam called them, that's what they are. And that's the hunger that sits within this person. The influence and the power to define reality using narration. And whenever they felt that they were being successful at this, they felt very powerful. But whenever they feel like they're not able to do this, then they begin to feel the very opposite. And this topsy-turvy, it can be devastating for the mental health. Very, very devastating. Okay? Because it represents a cascade. That is what mania is in some sense. A cascade. It's almost like there's no bottom. You just keep falling and falling on. You need somebody to break the fall. You need something to break the fall. Something or someone. Okay? And that, listen, let me put it this way. What is love? Love. Love is understanding. It's not the thing to be understood. It's just understanding. And love is hard. Why? Because as finite beings, limited beings, we have limits to our ability to absorb things and internalize things. And some think that this is a bad thing. It's not. You see, when you have very little, then the nature of your giving now becomes important. But if you had everything, if you had limitless whatever, then how would you qualify the nature of giving? The nature of understanding. Because this person, when they fall as if there's no bottom. When they rise, they can rise as if there's no limit. It's topsy-turvy. That's that Libra that is sitting down there on the ascendant. That's what it means. And these this dynamic of on and off, they will pattern the life story of this person all the way into everything. And those who love them are those who understand that this is what they are. So they don't really bring any judgment. Now the world is not like that. The world is not like that. Once you are like that, the bulk of people will reject you. Because everyone is looking for something that is sort of like stable, something they can rely on, and etc. And so basically the life story of this person will select a nucleus of friends that would have stayed with them till no matter the changes, because there's some type of affinity in those relationships. But it would have also created a bulk of people who basically rejected the individual and pushed them away. Okay, and this would have a tremendously detrimental effect on the person's mind. But this type of person, because they have the sense of authority that they're looking for, because they consider themselves to be an authority figure themselves. And it's not just any type of authority figure. They're very powerful in the sense of their self-expression. That's why it's conjunct Pluto. Okay? Because they know that they're somebody. And they feel it right down to their bones. But the problem is that this arrangement of gazing into awe, it literally, at some times, it zaps them of all of that. So it's, if that arrangement were not there, it's hard to tell what would have become. But if that arrangement were not there, you could, it means that the person could have been one thing in a very sustainable, long-term way. But the design, like I said, it's not an accident. Because the thing that's required of this person is, I want to see what you think. And as far as I'm concerned, it's an extremely high honor. Because why should God care what you think? Now, the moon represents a foundational nature to self-consciousness because it represents self-acceptance. Remember I said all the questions that are originated in Gemini, they are answered in the sign of Cancer. So it's a statement around the influence of the mother and her ability to take away the anxiety of the child. Okay? So where the moon goes to is how this process has occurred. The moon is in Sagittarius, meaning that it is the process of taking away this anxiety really is via the expansion of the mind. So that Mars in Scorpio generates the orgasmic experience that translates into that moon in Sagittarius. So that the mind is fed with knowledge, the knowledge to connect concepts together into philosophies and long-range patterns. The mother helped cultivate that aptitude in one way or the other. Okay? And because it's a statement about the Venus that is placed in Gemini, the moon is in the second house, which is reflective of that Venus. So that this person found pleasure through the mother in the area of not just understanding concepts, but delineating them into a much broader meaning. And because of that pattern, every woman that will come into this person's life, if the father represents social authority, social acceptance and social authority, the mother represents self-acceptance and self-authority. And that is the pattern we're looking at. It is connected to pleasure. And Jupiter is in the fourth house, meaning that this person, when they are by themselves, in their familiar environments where they feel at ease and peaceful with themselves, they begin to re-experience what that maternal influence is, because that's what they're looking for. Because sometimes when you are floating in the middle of the ocean with no land anywhere, you feel lost and hopeless. Well, guess what? Sighting land brings you this sense of that you're not lost. It brings you this sense of foundation. And that is how the natal chart is being compensated for. The fifth comes through the ability to remove the anxieties of this person. The anxieties are the raw material that the person needs in order to be able to narrate, because they contain all the questions. They contain the mind's ability to connect connect concepts together into long-range principles and philosophies, to investigate, right? Because that's what investigative journalism is all about, and to publish investigation, to connect all sorts of things together, and then to publish a story that is a description of how many things connect together. There's a tremendous amount of pleasure this person gains from that process. The raw material for all of that is why that Mars is switching on and off. Because if you must gain perspectives, you must be able to look at both sides of the same thing. That's why it was created, because it is the nature of this person's perspective. That is the outcome being sought. It's not about what do you think of this or what do you think of that. No. What do you think of everything? What do you think of anything, really? That's what it's really all about. It's not gazing at one particular thing in particular, or one thing in particular. No. You can gaze at anything you want, anything at all. What do you think of it? That's really what it is, you see? And the investigative aspect of this person is what that Scorpio really is, what that Mars and Scorpio really is. Because Scorpio is a type of perception that goes to the heart of whatever it is. Because at the base of everything, like I said, that concept space, as it translates into physical reality, it's sexual in some sense. That's how we see it as a physical universe. Okay, so with the Mars and that sexual whatever, this person is concerned with the base of how anything operates, especially those things that appear to be, hidden behind the curtain or whatever it is, right? They want to really know what's going on. Well, Scorpio is ruled by Pluto, so obviously the Sun conjunct Pluto in the sign of Cancer. We know the compensation is that Jupiter in the 4th house. Well, the Sun conjunct Pluto, it generates a Mercury. That's the inquisitiveness of that Gemini. So this person is hardwired to investigate, to uncover. Okay? It's the inclination that is given to their desire to narrate. And it has to be like that. Why? Because if it's not like that, they will give up that narration. At some point, everything becomes so useless. Everything becomes so unimportant. And then, you know what? Whatever. I'm not doing this anymore. But by connecting it to the scorpionic and the plutonic function, then the individual has no choice. Now, what are they investigating really? Well, there's Taurus on the cusp of the 8th house, because the 8th house, Scorpio and Pluto, they form a synthesis. All right? And part of this process, right, will involve the sharing, because that's what it is when you have the reverse of Taurus on the cusp of the 8th house and Scorpio on the cusp of the 2nd house. And then functional lights in both. The matter is sharing, and it's sharing of what? Possessions. Money, business relationships, intimate relationships. This is where the investigative drive, that's what they're always trying to uncover. They're trying to uncover what is going on in the area of relationships, partnerships, who is working with who, how, in the area of money. And because it is driven by Scorpio, they have a keen sense for power and the dynamics of power. Why? Because they need that powerful significance also within themselves. So they're drawn to those types of things. The 10th house is the house of the established order, the mainstream, if you want to call it that, because those are the custodians of social acceptance. Because at the end of the day, social acceptance is the mainstream social narrative. It doesn't mean it's correct. It just means that they are the ones holding power. Well, the sun is in the 10th house. All right? And so we're talking about institutions of power, control, institutions of establishment. It is conjunct Pluto because within the establishment, there are other establishments. Within the establishment, there are nucleuses of power. Well, whatever the nucleus of power is in the establishment this person grew up in, they're drawn to it. And their investigative or narrative desire would have led them to it. That's it. It's a compulsion. It's really out of their hands. And they will be drawn to investigate malfeasance. They can investigate anything else. They can investigate all sorts of things. No, they'll be drawn to malfeasance. They want to uncover. It's like someone who's trying to set a trap. They want to, because they want power themselves. And so what better way to gain power than to take power from something else or take power from someone else or whatever, right? Well, that's the thrust of it all. Remember, this narrative is not about any particular perspective per se. The connection to the sexual desire is basically to make sure that the ability to narrate is not given up. But they can choose whatever topic they want. They can narrate about sports, which they did. They can also narrate about malfeasance in politics or malfeasance in government, especially where finances are concerned. Now, Uranus is in the 8th house. It's in Taurus. All right? And Uranus rules Aquarius. Because I'm getting to the concluding stages of the synthesis. So we now have to start connecting the lines together. That Uranus is a ruler of Aquarius because the Uranus, Aquarius, and the 11th house cusp they form a synthesis. And while I was going through the biography of this person, it's a very interesting life story, but one part stood out. It was really the part that sealed the deal for me. In the way that the whole thing is sitting, and I'll tell you what it is. That Uranus in the 8th house is unusual. Uranus is unusual, not because Uranus as a functional light is unusual. It's because it represents that aspect of the mind that is kind of wired in a very different way. It is tuned into things that are not connected to the mainstream. So it represents some type of extrasensory perception. In the 8th house, it is a statement of that Mars in Scorpio. There is something unusual about this person's sexual desire. It's not just about the switching on and off. It's more. Okay? And when you begin to, investigate the unusualness in sexual desires, things can get really hairy, because the 8th house are usually things that people don't like to talk about, taboos and things like that. Okay? But they're very powerful because these are things that once they become secrets that open up, then it has the potential to bring down people or to elevate people, because those are statements of power. That's really what it is. So having Uranus in the 8th house is, let's just put it this way. It's someone who has access to shocking secrets, shocking details, and it's in Taurus. Shocking financial details, shocking taboos in the area of finance, shocking taboos in the area of power and money and sex. That's it. Okay? And that Uranus rules Aquarius. Well, where is Aquarius? Aquarius is on the cusp of the 5th house, the natural house of Leo. Guess what is also in Aquarius? It's the path of fortune. Now, before I go into what that path of fortune is talking about, on the 11th house cusp, which is the natural house of Aquarius, you find Leo. So the roles are reversed in some sense, but nothing changes. The roles are reversed, so what? Because what that axis is, the 11th to the 5th, what it is the axis of the ego. Now, in the 5th, the ego emerges as Leo, the active storyteller. That is really telling a personal story about the self. In Aquarius, the ego has been able to demonstrate that personal story in such a way that it has now attracted the significance of a group of storytellers whom the ego respects, and they acknowledge the presence and existence and the competence of the active storyteller in Leo. So Leo's desire really is to get to Aquarius, because by the time Leo arrives in Aquarius, Leo knows it's special, but you also know it's special. And better still, all those who consider themselves special, they also know that Leo is special. And that's like the pinnacle of Leo's desire, to be seen like that. Well, there's a path of fortune there, and it's on the cusp of the 5th house, because these persons' active storytelling, which their narration can be a part of, it really has significance. And it doesn't just have significance. Professionally, it has significance. That's why the path of fortune is there. Now, if you look at the 11th house in Leo, because like I said earlier, the Sun in Cancer conjunct Pluto in Cancer, it generates something revolving around acceptance. And this transforms into Leo. It also transforms into the Mercury that is walking in Leo. That Mercury is on the move. It wants to get into the 11th house because Leo sits on the cusp of the 11th house. All right. So that's this person playing the role of that narrator, the thinker, the logician or whatever it is, or the narrator, right? But it wants to narrate something that is on the cusp of the 11th house. And we see that this narration process is taking place. Why? Because Vesta emerges from Leo in the 11th house. That Vesta is an unacknowledged or an unprepared for expertise or competence that emerges as a byproduct of something else. What's the byproduct of narration? Well, to understand what that is, we need to look at that 11th house, what it's really talking about. It has Leo on the cusp, but it's talking about a group. A significant group. of storytellers. All right? Doesn't matter what it is, really. But it's a powerful group because the ruler of that Leo is the sun. And the sun is conjunct Pluto. That's a statement of power. But it's in the sign of Cancer. So it's a foundational group in that sense. And it is being compensated for by that Jupiter. Because Jupiter is in the 4th house. And the moon is in Sagittarius. So it's a group that is concerned with pleasure. It is a group that is also concerned with, it has some type of foundational basis to it. So it is like an establishment kind of organization in some sense. But obviously it's an establishment organization that the narrator can function in. Because in some sense, the narrator, that Mercury, is looking for the significance from this group, the recognition from this group, okay? And the recognition is there, but it's not there as a direct thing because it's Vesta. Vesta is an asteroid. So there's an aspect of this individual that becomes the recipient of that path of fortune, even though that's not what the individual was really going for. Okay? Now, one of the things that cemented my perspective on this character is the part about where the character visited Africa. And he visited Africa to cover the sporting event that was tagged the Rumble in the Jungle in some sense. The fight that took place between two heavyweight boxers and, I think it was Muhammad Ali or something like that. It took place in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, because it is very important to narrate this before I summarize the synthesis. What is Leo? What is Aquarius? And I've spoken extensively about Leo and Aquarius in my podcasts, but Aquarius is the loftiest form of the ego. And what is the ego really? The ego is a storyteller. In Leo, the ego is the active storyteller, and the focus of that story is on the self. And in order to tell that story properly, the ego creates, which means it imagines different types of narratives. And as it imagines these narratives, it is constantly assessing the merit or the significance of these narratives, in as much as how are they a reflection of the storyteller. Because the storyteller, even though it's an active storyteller, it doesn't really know what it is. It has an idea of its significance that sits within it. But if others don't know of this significance, then there is a doubt associated with that significance. And so the active storyteller imagines different themes or different variations of narratives. The narratives themselves are created in the imagery of the storyteller, because you can't create anything outside of yours. You can only create yourself, various versions of yourself, right? Now, the active storyteller in Leo, it examines all these variations. It's examining them for something. They are all mirrors. And in these variations, the storyteller is trying to catch glimpses of itself, because the active storytelling part really is a narration about the self. But we know what is in the self. We know that this individual has this void, and that the void is a deliberate thing. So that even though they are able to launch a narration, and the launch process itself is fluctuating also off and on, right? All of these create complexities. I remember, when you are not allowed to do something simple, then you have no choice but to become complex. But it is within complexity that you can encode the highest of patterns, the highest of knowledges. And that's what I'm coming to, really. You see? Because this storytelling and the variations that it creates, Leo is examining them for images of itself. And that's why this person creates. Their creativity is tied to the fact that they're trying to catch a glimpse of what it is that is really doing the creation. And it becomes part of their creativity style. And everything they create contains the image of that void. The void itself is what they're really investigating. Now, in Aquarius, the ego begins to tell itself the highest possible stories regarding its creativity. Which means that it is within Aquarius that this ego can catch the highest glimpses of itself. And just like Leo delights in these glimpses in Aquarius, because they are no longer just personal glimpses, they're glimpses that come from others whom the storyteller respects, the group. The joy is the joy is extremely powerful enough to launch the nature of Pisces, which is self-transcendence, which is where the individual sublimates all their desires towards a higher perspective or a higher authority that they cannot understand. That's the reason for the void. The void is there to draw the loftiest of stories, the loftiest of perspectives, the most beautiful, truthful narratives, not just about reality, about themselves. When this person went to Africa, what they saw changed them. It changed them. It probably destroyed or dampened excessively their ability to create. Why? Because they saw something that was antithetical to every instinct they have always known in their reality. They saw ugliness. And it's worse. They saw the truth behind that ugliness. They are an investigative person. And they understood the nature of this ugliness. They understood it in that same way that the Mars is in Scorpio. And they made automatically, unconsciously, remember the moon is in the second house. That second house is material. Even though it is being generated by by Sagittarius. It doesn't matter. The moon is in the second house. They felt the truth of this situation to their very bones, and they understood why. And that moment may have defined their future. Because after that trip, they were never the same person, because it must have hit them like a brick. Alright? It's too much ugliness. And they understood what or who was responsible for that ugliness. As a result of that, they no longer could participate. It was a massive blow to this person. I think it was something that, because eventually this person, the character, committed suicide by firearms. Now, they succumbed to this drain. Why? Because they felt no way out anymore. And the problem is coming from that void. It's not a problem. Because the merit of this person is not in the individual stories that they told. It's in their life story. Do you understand now? It's not in any of the individual stories because it cannot really be defined. The merit is in their life story. And so one day, at some point in time, this life story will be told. But it has to be told with the end result. The end result being that this person saw the nature of human ugliness and understood the motives behind it. And they rejected it. The rejection is not a conscious thing, even though they are active storytellers. The rejection was so profound. Remember, this person was born a rebel, not just any type of rebel. They believe that they are their own authority figure. All of that is by design. It is to give them the strength to reject it. Now, suicide is not a good thing. But it is a reflection of how you can say how disgusted this person really became with the stories that are being told by human beings on earth. And the fact that they committed suicide at the end of the day is an indictment on those stories. Because Aquarius cannot sit with such ugliness. It simply can't. And coupled with the fact that this person, you see, like I said, you may not be able to define this all. You may not be able to really say anything precise about it. But if there's one thing you know about it, is that it encompasses beauty beyond imagining. And the seed for this beauty was sown very early in this person's life when the mother began to calibrate the mind. There was a certain pleasure that came from it. There's also a certain erotica that came from it. But what all of this did was to help the person pattern this thing that has no pattern. All right? And whenever this pattern clashes with ugliness in the world, they felt it as a hopelessness of some kind. Some type of insurmountable, because it's not a statement about the world. It's a statement about themselves. Was this person ever really in control of their life? Yes and no. Because when you see these types of patterns, half the matter is already out of your hand. They're just compelled. And there are many ways the story could have gone, but not really. Maybe the thing that could have changed is the suicide, but in terms of the thing that created the euphoria and the depression, it's an engine, sort of. And it's meant to create a raw material that can now be processed. Because why? Since they could not narrate, they couldn't eventually narrate what it is that they truly felt in a way that's, was really meant for the whole world, then their life story now becomes the narration. Because this person lived and died for the loftiness of Aquarius. You know what Aquarius is? Aquarius is, that loftiness is really a social pattern. How humanity as a whole should relate with each other. There's a famous quote I read about this person on one of the sites, when I was looking him up. And that this person came to a conclusion that the so-called free market system is the most evil system ever devised by humankind. You don't come to those types of realizations, playfully or something like that. This was a very, very potent realization. And that is the voice and the statement of Aquarius. Because only the Aquarian can think like that. Why? Because the loftiness of the Aquarian comes from truth. That truth is a statement of freedom, really, what it is. Because the freedom from ignorance. It's the freedom for the human to be the best you can possibly be. To tell the most beautiful stories that are true. Not falsehood. And so that statement is a rejection of ugliness. Do you understand why the void was created there in the first place? It is for that reason. And that's why I'm predicting that when the proper context is applied, this person's life story becomes a story that will be told, should be told. Because there are many people in the world, but how many people does God want to know their perspectives about anything? And there are many ways in which you can design these types of things. This is one method, and I'm narrating it as it is. There are many other details that are possible pathways in the life of this person. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to delineate the natal chart based on some of the public information and the underlying story, because it's not about the individual moving parts. It's about the core narrative, the core motivations. Okay. One of the downsides of early exposure to this type of awe is that the mind cannot find boundaries. You need boundaries to be able to identify things. You need boundaries on yourself to be able to identify yourself as something. All right. And if things begin to encounter difficulties in those areas, it's hard for the person to really know how to express themselves. And yet this person is compelled to express themselves. Okay. So within that person is tied a complex posturing, so as to be able to generate a very complex narrative. Now, you might think that any of the narratives being generated is where you can find one or two truths or whatever. No, it's not. It's in all of them. The entirety of the narrative of the life story is the thing that is telling the story. Okay? So it is safe to assume that this person, wherever they are, you can imagine that they are at peace. Why? Because, it's such a difficult thing to cope with. It's a difficult thing to grapple with. And God is a source of beauty, a source of goodness. If He gives you a very difficult task, it's because He wants somehow it's almost as if you have chosen this in some type of service, in some type of self-sacrifice. That's the essence for that statement of this is a horrible, evil thing, because it's wicked. The free market system, what it's called, there's nothing free about it. It's a wicked system. And it's not wicked because of it's a wickedness that is ingrained it's a wickedness towards humanity itself. Do you understand at what level you must perceive in order to be able to come to that type of reality? Because most people, they live off this system, they benefit from this system, they eat from this system. Yeah, they may know that one or two things are not sitting correctly, yes, but what the hell do they care? This person must have felt very strongly about the system, about the way it operates, about the people running it and all that. And that's the story. Because whatever the assessment is, that assessment has been delivered to the one who sent him, to the one who created the theater of experience in the first place. All of this has been in pursuit or some type of service towards the age we're entering now, the time period the world is in now. That's where all these things, they're like, like messengers in some sense, that God uses to acquire a certain type. Okay, this is what this person thinks. This is what that person thinks. All right. That's really what it is. So that's the synthesis of this person. And I hope it's revealing to the person who ordered it. Thank you.